Funding for this Frontline special is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.
If I think back, what I would remember most is fear. I can't remember a time when I didn't feel afraid.
She seemed very outgoing. She seemed, of all of the children, probably the best adjusted. I mean, she always just seemed like a normal, happy kid to me.
And I just lie there curled up in a ball and cry and cry and cry. And I stay there for a while. And I feel safe there. I know he's not going to follow me, and I feel safe.
We had almost an ideal American dream, if you will. 3 wonderful daughters, a beautiful wife. Our kids were very happy.
I want someone to hear me so badly, but she told me that no one would believe me and that no one would ever love me again.
Well, I was sitting at home in my family room. I had my son in my lap where I was giving him a bottle, and my daughter was playing on the floor below me with some of her friends, coloring in coloring books. And my daughter asked me something, and when I looked down and met her eyes, somehow the light behind it or the shade of my daughter's eyes or something just triggered this feeling of terror in me.
In California, Eileen Franklin says just one look from her 6-year-old daughter jarred a memory so terrible she repressed it for 20 years.
All right, listen to this one. Meet Eileen Franklin. Eileen Franklin was the center of a very important landmark case.
The murder she witnessed happened 20 years ago, and the murderer was her father. Reporters literally fell over each other.
The story Eileen Franklin told in court in 1990 happened when she was a child.
The way I remember it is that I was 8 years old, and I was in my father's Volkswagen van with him. And we drove around the corner from my house, and I saw Susan playing outside. And I got really excited, and I asked my dad if Susan could get in the van with us. And so we stopped, and Susan got in. And in the back of the van, there was a bed. And Susan and I were bouncing up and down on the bed, and my dad drove us out to an area that's wooded. And he pulled over to the side of the road, and Susan and I were playing on the bed, and he came back into the back, and I went up into the front, and when I looked back, he had Susan's arms pinned above her head, and he was on top of her, and he was moving back and forth on her, and then I curled up in a ball on the floor and made myself invisible, which is what I used to do as a kid. And afterwards, I remember my dad being out of the van, and that I looked down and I saw Susan sitting below me, and she was sitting on a rock with her knees up, and my father was approaching her with his arms above his head and a rock in his hands. And I believe that I screamed, because Susan looked up at me and then looked at my father, and she brought her hands up to her head, and I heard the rock come down twice on her. I didn't know that it was humanly possible for a person to have a memory come back after 20 years of something.
The memories which Eileen claimed she had recalled were of her best friend, Susan Nason, who had disappeared from her home in Foster City, California in September 1969. 10 weeks later, her body was found in a ravine outside the town. Her death had been caused by blows to her head. The murderer was never apprehended. Eileen's repressed and now newly recovered memories created a media sensation.
Why did she wait 20 years to report it? She had repressed it.
So why is it that some people can remember beginning at an age when you do remember things, 7, 8, 9, and other people absolutely do not?
In psychiatry, we call these things dissociation, which is to separate yourself from what's going on, to feel unreal.
Dr. Lenore Terr, a psychiatrist and expert witness for the prosecution, explained on television what she presented to the jury. A theory of repressed memory that would be further popularized in a television movie about the case.
Do you know what that would cost?
This whole case depends on proving repressed memory. According to Dr. Terr, traumatic repression is substantiated by repeated violence in childhood.
But in order to fit Dr. Terr's theory that repressed memories involved repeated violence in childhood, Eileen had to come up with other violent experiences that she had repressed.
And then my father held me down on this table.
She recalled repressed memories of sexual abuse by her father. At least she said so. In the movie, in therapy, in the trial, and she continues to say so today.
I had to do a lot of work to acknowledge the memories as being real. And I've tried pushing them away, I've tried denying them, I've tried ignoring them, and they don't go away, they're still there. And I've gotten to the point that I realize there's no sense in denying them.
Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a memory expert who does not believe in the phenomenon of repressed and then recalled memories, testified for the defense.
Eileen's memory, while richly detailed, contained no information that wasn't part of the public domain, widely publicized. So it was in the public domain that little Susie was hit on the head twice with a rock, and that her ring was crushed, and there was a mattress or a box spring found near her body, and those kinds of details, a matter of public knowledge. And other facts in Eileen's story, uncheckable.
Dr. David Spiegel, who believes in the concept of repressed and recovered memories, also testified for the defense.
What I told the court was that I thought it was possible that she could have, witnessed it and then dissociated or repressed the memory. But that several things made me concerned about the credibility of her recollection. The first is that dissociated memories are out of sight, but they're not out of mind. So even if you can't consciously remember it, there should be some evidence, if you had this memory, of its influence. And yet there was very little that changed in her behavior subsequent to the loss of her friend, in her relationship with her father. She took long trips with him. She rode in the same van in which the girl was initially attacked, according to her subsequent recollection. Secondly, we know that she lied subsequently. She initially said that this recollection came to her in a flash when she was hypnotized by a therapist. She then had a talk with her mother, who had become an attorney, and changed her story. She then said, well, I was looking in my daughter's eyes, and my daughter was the same age as little Susan, and then memory came to me. So either she was lying then or she's lying now about what happened, but it always worries you about a witness when you can document that they were falsifying information.
I was really scared. I didn't know anything about repressed memories. I knew less than nothing about it. And when I told my brother what I had remembered, he looked shocked and he backed away from me. And I panicked and I said, well, what if I told you that I got the memories back as a result of hypnosis? And then he completely accepted it. And he said, oh, well, then that makes sense, and that hypnosis is like peeling away layers of an onion. And so he then accepted that it had happened. But in truth, I hadn't been hypnotized, but I didn't know how to explain where these memories came from. So yeah, I told him I lied to my brother, and what I was trying to do was find a way to deal with the truth.
Whatever the truth was, based on Eileen's memories alone, with no corroborating evidence, the jury found George Franklin guilty of the murder of Susan Nason. He was sentenced to life in prison. The verdict shocked experts in the field of memory research. Dr. James McGaugh is the director of the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory at the University of California.
Through experiments, we have shown that in general, there is a direct relationship between the degree of emotionality of an experience and the strength of the memory at a later time. Strongly emotional experiences lead to strong memories at a later time. The post-traumatic stress syndrome shows that very strong experiences, traumatic experiences, leave very, very strong memories. Those are verified. Those are validated, that relationship. Now what we're missing for the verification or the validation is evidence to support the claim that a traumatic experience occurs, but it's unavailable, and then later on it is recovered. And I don't know of any evidence from that. Trust me, will not do it.
Dr. Laura Brown, a psychologist and clinician in Seattle, Washington, claims that traumatic memories buried and then retrieved are hardly unusual and should be taken seriously.
I think that when you have observed someone, when someone has sat across from you and they're remembering these things, it changes your understanding of this thing of memory and the recovery of trauma memory.
Why do you think that that's why you were married to a guy who never did anything to her?
Lots of people remember things that no one can corroborate. Lots of things happen. You know, it's the old thing, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's there, does it make a sound? Yeah, it's made a sound. No one was there to hear it. If we don't know, if there was no witness, does it mean that it didn't occur?
In the debate about memory, the central mystery is, what does our mind do with traumatic experiences that happened a long time ago?
My daughter was born after I'd been married 6 years. My son was born approximately a year and a half later. We were living in Hawaii at the time. When my daughter was 5 years old, I found out that her father had sexually molested her. Some friends were staying in a hotel at Waikiki. They invited us down to the beach to spend a Sunday afternoon with them. When it came time to leave, we all went up to our friend's hotel room. We all changed and got ready to leave. I was the first one ready, and my son was ready to leave, so I said, I'll go down and bring the car around to the front. By this time, our friends were down, but my husband and my daughter were not yet down. So we waited, and we waited quite a while, several minutes, 10, maybe 15 minutes. And eventually they came down. Got in the car, we drove off to the airport, dropped the friends off, went home. And it bothered me, it nagged at me that they had been so late. I was a little annoyed at my husband for taking so much time and risking missing our friend's plane. The next day it was still nagging at me, and I asked my daughter, what were you and Daddy doing up in that room so long? And she said, I was putting my mouth where Daddy goes wee-wee. My first reaction was I was horrified. I was stunned. I believed her. I knew that she wasn't making this up. But I was afraid that if I let her see how upset I was, that she would think she had done something wrong, that she would feel guilty somehow. So I didn't pursue this. I just changed the subject and didn't talk to her about it. I didn't question her any further.
That evening, she confronted her husband. He admitted what he'd done and asked for psychiatric help. The incident was never again discussed with the child.
I believed at the time if this horrible incident could just fade out of her memory and go away, that it wouldn't hurt her.
But Jane grew up a troubled young woman. She was in therapy in high school and again in college.
In 2 years of therapy in high school, my therapist worked with me on giving me confidence. The therapy I started as an adult went on for 6 years. Now, this therapist did ask me if anything ever happened with our family, but she never said anything specific about were you sexually abused by a family member. She tried every which way to try and break this wall of not remembering. I had no recollection at all of being abused.
I knew that she didn't remember. And I became convinced that she needed to know this, but before I told her, I consulted the therapist that she had seen in her teens. I made an appointment with him, and I told him the whole story. I said, "Does she need to know this?" And he said, "Yes, she does." And he gave me advice on how to tell her.
She said she wanted to fly down and tell me something in person. I was worried she had cancer or something. And she assured me it wasn't a health issue. And she flew down and told me, and it just all fit together. I immediately could remember what she was telling me. It was just a wave of memories.
Were you shocked?
No, it was the kind of thing where you have such a strong hunch that something's going on, that as soon as you hear what it is, you say, of course, yeah. And it all fit. Everything fit when she told me.
Do you think that you would have remembered if your mother didn't tell you?
I think I was real close. I think it would have taken another year or two to remember.
Would she have remembered what happened to her as a child if she were not told? No one knows. What exactly she remembers now is not clear. But whatever she now remembers, she says, helped her make sense of all the things that didn't make sense before. And it helped her heal.
It all made sense. I had a reason that I always knew I had, but never, as a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, didn't know what all was going on. Everything came together for me. I felt like a whole person for the first time.
There are many young women, troubled and depressed, who are looking for answers to their unhappiness.
I was a mess.
I couldn't work. I had depression so badly that I was in bed most of the day. I would go into rages, at the drop of the hat, drop of a pin. I would just go into a rage. My emotions were very extreme. And so I just assumed that it must have been something very severe that happened to me to make me hurt so much.
I began to have these horrible panic attacks that just seemed to come out of the blue. I felt the desperation that I'd always felt, only magnified about 1,000 times. And I was in therapy. I think I've been in therapy on and off almost most of my life. But I was seeing, the school counselors, and they were helping, but it wasn't really addressing the issue. And finally, everything fell apart.
My depression was so deep, and the bulimia and everything, all those factors, I didn't date, those kind of factors put together. And we talked about family dynamics and how I didn't get along with my family, how I felt I never was good enough. And they said there had to be something more, that wasn't enough to cause the kind of problems that I had.
I had had an eating disorder from about 8th grade on, and I had been dealing with the depression and the bulimia. And then about my freshman year in college that summer, I went to my mom and I told her that, I'm bulimic and I need to get some type of treatment.
Holly Ramona grew up in an upper-middle-class family in California, the eldest of 3. Her father, Gary, was a vineyard executive. Her mother was a housewife. With her 2 sisters, she had what seemed a privileged childhood, private lessons, trips, and exotic vacations. Before Holly asked her mother for help, life in the Ramona family seemed very good.
If you would have asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said everything was perfect. We were the perfect family. I loved my husband. At that time, I thought he was a good father.
When Holly asked her mother for help, Stevie Ramona went to search for a therapist. She found a social worker by the name of March Isabella.
I went down to interview March Isabella and asked her what causes bulimia. And she told me many, many causes. And one of them was that 70 to 80% of sometimes eating disorders, there's molestation involved.
When Stephanie interviewed me, she kept asking me, well, why would my daughter have bulimia? And I said, well, there are many reasons, but I would need to see Holly. And she said, well, there must be some reason. And so I kind of gave her a profile. I said they're often caretakers and people pleasers. They're not in touch with their own feelings. It's not unusual that they're a parentified child. There's a high incidence of sexual abuse. In fact, I've read as high as 70 to 80%. In my own practice, I've seen 60 to 70%.
So I called March Isabella and I started therapy with her. And about 4 months into therapy, after I returned from being home for about a month, I started having flashbacks or memories of abuse that had occurred. And slowly I started disclosing them to my therapist.
When the memory came, I analyzed probably the first 3 memories, looking to see what they meant, because they weren't real extreme. It was my father was touching my leg, or as a little girl he was touching my leg all the way up to my thigh, and I felt frozen. I felt numb. I didn't like him doing that. It was a very strong reaction to something that could have been, Dad's just rubbing her legs are sore, or Dad's just tickling her. But it impacted her greatly. And then week after week, the progression of what had occurred had gotten a little more advanced. And I would listen, trying to assess, is this abuse? This is not abuse.
For a few months, Holly and her therapist sifted through Holly's past, searching for forgotten feelings and buried memories which would explain her depression and her bulimia. Finally, they say, they were both convinced Holly was sexually abused by her father.
In the beginning, when I started having them, I thought, maybe I'm going crazy, or am I just making this up? And then it progressed to the point where I went into the inpatient treatment, and I went under a sodium amytal procedure. And then the day after that, I confronted my father with the abuse.
I didn't understand what was going on. I mean, I was trying to understand what she was saying, and then I said, Holly, what are we talking about? What's going on? And she said, well, you raped me. And I said, Holly, this is not true. What is going on here?
It was too real. When I'd have a memory, I'd wake up sometimes terrified in the middle of the night, or there's some nights now I'll wake up huddled in the corner of my bed because I'm afraid that my father is there. And you can't have those things if it didn't really happen.
A mother has a gut feeling. First off, when your daughter comes to you, you have a gut feeling, and it's a strong, I don't care who it is, it's just something that you have, and then you go with the symptoms, and it just all comes together.
You said you were happy for 25 years, so where was your gut feeling?
Well, I didn't, nobody said that, nobody told me that Gary had raped his daughter.
It became known as the Ramona case, dividing not only the family, but also further splitting the therapeutic community over the validity of recovered memory of sexual abuse.
If we take seriously our duty to our patients, then we are allies in their healing. And we are helping them to become more powerful, to become freer, to become more assertive, and to be in a psychological condition where they can, in fact, hold perpetrators accountable, where they're not intimidated and they're not afraid to tell the truth.
If you tell the truth about your life, you begin to see the world more clearly, and you have more power and more choice. You're more in charge of your life. If that truth happens to include that you were victimized, then tell that part of the truth. Because when you tell that part of the truth, then you can begin to change the effects that had on you, and to realize that it didn't happen because of something you did, or because you were weird or unique, or because you were a bad person. It happened because we live in a culture in which violence is more acceptable than sex, and in which sexual violence is extraordinarily common.
Dr. Salvador Minuchin is an eminent psychiatrist who now works in the field of family therapy.
We need to be very, very clear that there are two issues. One is that at this point, at this historical point in the United States, we are discovering a tremendous amount of incest and sexual abuse. So we are not challenging that fact. What is important when we are discussing that issue is that therapists are creating, together with patients, memories that may be false. They may be false, but there is a sense in the part of the patient that they are real, because they are consensually validated. You and me agree. And there is this sense that if I defend myself against this past, then life will change.
But if Holly felt better after she confronted her father with her memories, he was devastated. Abandoned by his family and fired from his job, he decided to sue his daughter's therapist for malpractice.
Gary Ramona told a Napa jury today how he heard and found out that his daughter had accused him of rape.
Marge said that I would take Holly into our bedroom at night. I would close the door.
For the first time, the court would hear a malpractice suit in therapy brought by a non-patient, as Gary Ramona sued March Isabella and co-defendant Richard Rose for malpractice and implanting false memories of sexual abuse.
And I told her that it was absolutely a lie. It was not true.
Ramona asked for $8 million in damages.
We have the proof. We know you did this.
How does memory work? Can memories be lost and then retrieved?
It was very painful having those memories. I didn't want to have them. It made
Were
me
Holly's
feel
memories authentic,
gross and disgusting.
or were they implanted by her therapists? There were 44 witnesses and experts in a trial that lasted 8 weeks. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus testified for the plaintiff.
If there's no corroboration, you can't just know about the past by how someone remembers it, because false memories, when they're a product of suggestion, can be as detailed, they can be as vivid, they can be as confidently expressed, and there's no way for even the most sophisticated therapist, clairvoyant, anyone to tell the difference between a memory that is real and a memory that is a product of suggestion, unless you've got some corroboration.
She felt like someone was in the room and she was unsafe with that person.
March Isabella defended her therapeutic methods.
A memory of her father in her doorway. And my note is she was probably molested and remembering the abuse. I listened for the first 3 weeks, probably through about the first 3 or 4 memories, analyzing them, coming to a conclusion of, was she abused, or is this just some figment of her imagination? Is this a distorted memory process? Is this a very, very sick girl? And as she gave me more and more of what she was remembering and her reactions to what she was remembering, then I did come to a point where, yes, I believed that this had really occurred.
The jury deliberated for 16 hours. Then came the verdict. Gary Romano was awarded $500,000 in damages.
It is a mother's worst nightmare. He shouldn't have received a penny for raping his own daughter. And nobody gets it, and I hope someday you learn.
10 people can't tell me something that I know happened didn't happen. They weren't there and they didn't go through it. So he probably feels pretty good right now.
I lost my family. And I've been accused of something that's absolutely not true. I lost my career. I haven't seen my children in 4 years. What did I win? Tell me what I won. I was able to prove that the malpractice and negligence that was done to our family and our daughter, I was able to prove that they implanted and reinforced false memories. That was proven in court, clearly. But, that was court. Life goes on.
The verdict was seen as an enormous blow to the victims of repressed memories and their therapists.
Now that the jury has told the world that, maybe Holly's memories weren't true, that we can't really believe them, now other victims of sexual abuse are really questioning whether anybody will believe them.
If you don't want that to happen, if you don't want survivors to speak out, if you don't want them to tell the truth, if you don't want them to take you to court, then it's very advantageous not only to attack the credibility of survivors, but to attack anyone who helps them.
The debate is a century old and has its roots in Vienna, where Sigmund Freud lived and worked.
Well, Freud was really, in a sense, the first psychiatrist. And people were coming with their problems, with their unhappinesses. And he called what they were, quote, suffering from, hysteria. That is, they were suffering from, as he put it early on, reminiscences, ideas, memories. And what he was looking for then was, what were these memories? What were the ideas that were bothering primarily women? There were also men, but it was mainly women that Freud was seeing. And what he discovered, what he more or less stumbled on, at least as he tells the story, is that these women had been sexually abused in childhood. So he developed a theory that if somebody is sexually abused in childhood, they will develop later on in adulthood what he called a neurosis. But what we would today say is simply unhappiness. And he called it, sometimes this neurosis took the form of hysteria, and other times it took other forms, obsessional neurosis. But basically it was people were unhappy later in life, and Freud thought he found the reason for this, namely sexual abuse in childhood. So in 1896, he decided to present his new finding to the world at what is by now a famous meeting in which Freud got up and he read a paper. Well, he didn't read it really. Freud was amazing at simply speaking. He just stood up and talked. And he called it the etiology of hysteria. That is, the origins of hysteria. So we would say today the origins of human unhappiness, really. So he read this paper, or he gave this paper, and he expected to be met with enormous applause, that people would recognize, oh my goodness, here is the first time that anybody has ever come up with a theory about what happens in childhood and what this leads to in later life. And instead of which, the people responded with total silence. And he began on a very high note. He said, gentlemen, I am here to tell you that I have found the caput nili of psychopathology. I found the source of the Nile. I have taken this river to its bed, to where it really begins. It all begins in early childhood. It all begins with sexual abuse. And there was stony silence.
Freud was isolated. He had a new revolutionary theory for mankind which he called the seduction theory, which no one wanted to touch. He clung to the seduction theory, publicly at least, for a few years, then decided that his colleagues were right and that he had been wrong. His patients were not suffering from repressed memories of incest, but from repressed wishes for incest which came out as false memories, and which he, unwittingly, might have encouraged.
Clerk's office in the morning to pick up the
It took another 75 years before the women's movement challenged his decision. Sally Goldfarb is a law professor and an expert on women's rights and family law.
When Sigmund Freud first put forward his view that a large number of women had been sexually abused by their fathers, he came in for a dreadful amount of criticism and very hostile reaction, and he then revised his view and decided that the women were making up their claims of child sex abuse, which went down much more easily with members of Viennese society because, frankly, it's a lot easier to think that women are hysterical and making things up than to recognize that men who are seemingly well-adjusted and successful members of the community might be perpetrating the most horrific and heinous acts against their own children.
Many people who would come to therapy claiming that they had been sexually abused were treated not as though it were reality, but again, as though it were a fantasy or a wish on the part of the child. And that essentially caused a lot of disbelief, if not major disbelief, in incest from that time until probably the mid-1970s, late 1970s, when we had what's been called the age of rediscovery of incest.
One of the real criticisms of earlier generations of therapists was that they had not taken women seriously. Women would tell horrendous stories of things that happened to them and their families, to their doctors, to their psychiatrists, and they were put on Milltown, I think it was in the 50s, tranquilized. They were not taken seriously. So the next generation of daughters who, in a sense, were, I think, expressing the outrage, the unexpressed outrage of their mother's generation, as well as their own, demanded to be heard.
We have an incest survivors movement that has gone public. The taboo about talking about incest has largely broken down. Many survivors, including a lot of celebrities, have come forward and said this happened to them. And that is deeply upsetting to people who don't want to recognize that in our society there are a lot of sexual abusers, including people who we might think are very successful.
100 years later, we're back where we started. Freud started in 1896. It's just about 1996. We're back at the same place with one major difference. Freud was a lone, unique voice in the wilderness, crying out for a very brief period, terrible things happen to women. They happen because of men, and we've got to think about it. We've got to stop it. We've got to do something about it. He was the only one. He was silenced. He lost up his courage. He went away and began psychoanalysis, which I think has been a misfortune for the world. Today, 100 years later, we have women who are saying, we will not be silenced about this.
Miss America 1958.
Well, one of the questions we're asking today is how can a person forget something so awful as abuse?
I was an incest victim from age 5 to age 18. Today I stand before you at age 54, an incest survivor.
Could something happen in your childhood that was so terrible that your mind locks it away? This woman says she was abused by a relative, but her mind blocked it out.
You know, when you remember, or at least when I remembered something like this, even though I had no prior knowledge, I knew immediately that this had happened.
And I trailed after my father because I immediately repressed all of his molestation and abuse, and my mother was off in her own world. So I was in the
But
garage.
just as in Freud's time, many therapists question the stories of repressed memories of sexual abuse.
I am not saying that there is no sexual abuse. I am not saying that there are no incest. I am saying that the therapy that says there is some place in the brain, a memory, that the memory is intact, and that if we move out the repression, the memory will appear, that is incorrect. There is no scientific evidence for this kind of thinking.
I personally have never met anyone who lied about being an incest victim or being an abuser of substances. No one would choose that way to go. So if you're saying to me, what do you think, what do you feel, do you believe her? The answer is, darn right I do.
Why would I want to spend even 1 minute in this office if I didn't have to?
Right.
And yet I have to. I have to come back. I mean, it's like a magnet. I need the healing. I need your healing powers, Joanne. I need you. I need. We all need each other too. We all need each
That's
other.
very important, each other. I know everyone in group has had trouble with their families, honoring their memories, respecting them, believing them. Everyone in group
Across the country, thousands of women meet in groups to recall and share memories of sexual abuse.
Okay, and
Joanne
so I
Stillwagon's group meets in Southern California.
because family is very important, and it's hard to find yourself the outcast in the family because you're the one that's talking about the family secret. What happens as a survivor, especially a survivor of molestation, sexual molestation? The people around you are not going to believe you. Most of the time, 90% of the times, if it's incest, the family's going to turn against you. The mother, the father, and your siblings. So you're out in the world alone with these memories. You're the family enemy because you're telling the secret, all right? And so these survivors begin to be your family as you're going through this process. Are you having any memories?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to share any that have been coming up?
How graphic should I be?
The truth. Just come from a place of truth.
Well, I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to say. I guess ever since I've been married and I've been sober off the drugs and alcohol, having intercourse with Sean is just getting more and more like I'm starting to remember that my perpetrator had sex with me, and I smell him and I feel him.
Growing up, I was terrified of the water, and I didn't realize why. I mean, when I went in the bathroom for any reason, I'd lock the door.
My youngest sister accused me of breaking up the family, and she said she'll never talk to me again, so I feel a real loss. I'm just grieving.
For the first time in their life, they got somebody here who's going to listen to them that believes them, and I do believe them, and I've never had a person come in my office that I don't believe, and I tell them that I believe them. That they have someone now, like a safety net, that they can start letting it out.
Dr. Michael Yapko is a clinical psychologist and specialist in hypnosis who recently published a book in which he criticizes the techniques that many therapists use in recovering memories.
The recovery therapist tends to view problems in terms of a presumed history of abuse. And so by looking for abuse, expecting to find abuse, It's no surprise when they uncover abuse. I think it was psychologist Abraham Maslow who once said that if the only tool that you have is a hammer, then everything around you begins to look like a nail.
I didn't have any memories until I was over 60 years old. I didn't have any memories until both of my parents died. And they were so powerful. My father started molesting me when I was an infant, and he stopped when I don't even know when he stopped. The abuse was extreme. I was physically beaten. Both my mother and my father molested me sexually. I was put into a wooden box that was a punishment
Therapists believe these stories because they are taught to believe philosophically, therapeutically, that in order to help your patient, you have to believe them.
He sent me out to prostitution when I was about 8 or 9.
And so what we find out is that as the person becomes increasingly immersed in the belief system that abuse happened, and then with each subsequent session, they're encouraged to recover more detail and more detail and more detail. And now the therapist is getting immersed more deeply in the beliefs too, at which point it's hard to tell who's hypnotizing who at this point. Now we watch the allegations week by week grow and grow and grow. So what might have started out as a simple experience of sexual abuse, by weeks later, it's satanic ritual abuse. Our dad killed the pizza delivery guy and made us eat his gallbladder, and the stories just get more and more bizarre.
What I've been remembering is a lot of torture by my mother and my grandmother and 2 uncles. And the group that they were involved in, they tortured children, and sometimes they killed them. But I can remember a Halloween, a child came to my door and transposed on his face with the face of a little boy that I seen murdered. And it was such
3
a
years
shock
ago,
that I
Joanne herself suddenly remembered that she too had been sexually abused as a child.
I have 2 granddaughters, and when my second little granddaughter was born, she was very, very blonde, and she had a little curvy body. And she was 18 months old, and when she started walking and talking, I began to have flashbacks of severe sexual abuse. And my abuse was ritual abuse, and as I began to remember this, as the memories came, I myself had almost a nervous breakdown. I began to have flashbacks of horrendous ritual abuse, torture, sexual abuse.
Hundreds of these stories have been told and published in the last few years by self-proclaimed abuse survivors and people who interviewed them. The most famous of these books is The Courage to Heal, co-written by Ellen Bass.
In the vast majority of the situation, someone who says that he or she was sexually abused was indeed sexually abused, and in a very small percentage of situations, that wasn't true. It's very hard for all of us to face that it happens. It's very hard to face not only that children have been subjected to this, but it's even hard to face that people are capable of doing this to others. And anyone who has been a part of that is likely to have suffered some kind of traumatic amnesia in the process, because when you're talking about a situation that has an extremely high level of terror and physical pain combined, the whole process, what we're learning now and what the memory research is showing and what we document, the whole process of laying down the memories is not only emotionally different but physiologically different.
Look, all theories are possible. That's what scientific data gathering is all about, so that you can get some facts about life, and you can match those facts up against theoretical claims, and then we'll find out what the truth is. Now, it may turn out that when all of those facts come in, that all of the claims that memories are made, lost, and recovered, maybe those will turn out to be valid. I'm saying something that's very simple. We do not know them to be valid at the present time. Theories don't make them true. Asking me to trust you doesn't make them true. Evidence is what we need in order to be able to draw conclusions about the validity of various hypotheses or theories.
If scientists were with me doing this work, I don't think they would be able to doubt it. They would see it in front of them, and it's very real when you see it and you hear it and you feel it.
Well, as you know, I mean, I pushed men away in my adult life a lot, and I put them through a lot to get close to me.
Sarah Lee Blum is a therapist in Seattle who uses regression techniques with her clients.
And I'm just real hypervigilant about that.
The kinds of clients that come to me are usually people who were abused, traumatized as children, and the decisions that they made because of the trauma have led them to have great difficulties in their adult lives.
I want to overpower. I want to overpower men. I want to be stronger, and I want to make them not like me.
They often don't know that they were traumatized at all. They only know that in their adult life, they're pretty miserable, and that their life isn't working the way that they would like it to. And it's not until they're in therapy for a while that usually the trauma becomes known.
The shower thing keeps coming up. We were in the shower together, and I don't remember what happened. I just remember the terror of seeing his naked body, and you know how I am
How old are you?
Well, I was under 5.
You're in the bathtub, and the water's on. Feel your little body. She has had a variety of different types of abuse memories, and in the course of accessing her abuse memories, some of them she determined were sexual abuse. And her first response is to want to run from it.
I don't want to be there.
Yeah, I see that. You don't want to be there. You want to go, huh? What stops you?
He won't let me go.
What do you mean he won't let you go? How is he stopping you? Breathe, Kim. How's he stopping you?
He's holding my shoulder.
He's holding your shoulder. Okay. Now bring the fullness of you. Bring the grown-up you. The fullness of your womanhood. Bring her in there with you. Call her in.
I don't have to stay in here.
No, you don't have to stay in there. You don't have to stay in there.
I don't have to stay in here. No! Go away! Get out of here! Get out of here!
And when a client gets far enough into the memory, I won't allow them to back out of it. Because it's better for them, rather than to re-traumatize them, that they go through it.
Oh, I can see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can feel me too. Yeah. When the memory comes up, it's like a flashback. And so they're in the actual experience of being abused. Yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone anymore, Kim.
I can tell you how close to get.
Yes.
You'll listen.
Yes, you can tell us how close to get, and we will listen.
The use of regression therapy has flourished in the last 10 years.
That's the difference.
When I was working inpatient in a psychiatric hospital in the Phoenix area several years ago, I started to have clients come to me who were describing a new phenomenon. They were telling me that after years of not remembering trauma, sexual, physical abuse, that suddenly they were able to remember. They were able to see it very, very vividly. They were crying, they were hurt, very distraught over these discoveries. It was fascinating to me. That's where I started checking into the phenomenon of regression and studying regression therapy. In the hospital where I was at the time, everybody was doing it and having dramatic, fascinating results along with it. And so went to seminars, I learned the techniques, did some reading, got some individual supervision as well, and started to do regression therapies. Sure enough, with my first few clients that I was working with, they were getting images of trauma that they had never remembered that had occurred 20, 30, 40 years earlier.
When they access a memory, they are doing it out of what's coming up from within them. And the body doesn't lie, nor does the psyche lie. When they have emotion, deep feeling, and they're hurt or they're terrified, I don't think that people make that up.
You deserve to be loved, Mary. You're here to be loved, not hurt. Yeah, you're here to be loved.
They were intelligent, articulate women who would come in the door, and by the next day I'd come back on the unit and they're balled up in a corner crying and speaking with a little 5-year-old's voice about how horrible everything is, and it was shocking. It was shocking to me to see this kind of deterioration in these inpatient people. And all the therapists around me were telling me, this is wonderful. This means that they've finally broken through to the memories, and this is a part of the healing process for them.
Go all the way down into your 3-year-old. All the way down into him. 3-year-old Roger, with all those feelings and all those needs. Being right there with your mom. And this time, not stuck. This time you have a voice. And this time you have strength. This time you can express yourself the way you need to and the way you want to. Yeah. Yeah.
Get over here. I want you right here in front of me. I want you over here, right now. I want you right here in front of me, right this minute. Stop that crying, or I'll give you something to cry about.
No.
Get over here and sit down and shut up. Get over here and sit down and shut up. Get over here, sit down and shut up. Get over here. I want you over here right now. I want you here.
I see people every day, many people every day, who are accessing what I tend to call submerged memories rather than repressed memories, but they're accessing them not necessarily because of choice, but because they're in great pain in their lives and they're wanting to heal.
No!
You're not listening. I want you to shut up.
I wasn't seeing my clients get better. And in fact, what I was seeing was they were getting worse. So I went out and did my own study, looked at the research, looked at what had already been published. Frankly, regression wasn't there. All these things that I've been told in the different kinds of training seminars, they weren't proving true in my own studies. So what I did was I turned around to the clients that I had done regression work with. I contacted them. I gave them what articles I could find on the subject and let them know I have some very serious concerns about these things that you've seen while we've been doing hypnosis.
That you yourself have been doing.
Oh, yeah, that I was doing with them. And I let them know I have very good reason to believe that your images are not necessarily real.
And as you drift, with every breath you take, feel yourself getting younger and younger, all the way back down to that time a long time ago when your life was just beginning. People, as I said, they're here to heal. And in their process, they can go as far back as their own psyche will allow them, their own consciousness will allow them to go. And as you drift, memories go back as far back as we can imagine. Not everybody can access them way far back, but some do. Some people can access birth memories. It's okay, I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. Huh? I'm right here. Feel me here. Feel me here. There are some people that go even beyond conception. But like the woman that accessed a memory from when she was in the fallopian tube and got stuck. And this stuckness has hurt her in her adult life. See what's stopping you? I'm right here. What's there? What's in there? And so when she is able to change that in some way, she can move forward with ease in her life. And that needs to be corrected at the source of the problem, which for her was in the fallopian tube. What's in there? What's in there?
In many ways, psychology has become the religion of this century. 100 years ago, if you had questions about the meaning of your life, an inability to have satisfaction, whatever it was, you could go to the village priest and you could talk to them and find comfort. If you had guilt over something that you'd done, you could go to confession and receive relief, a granting of forgiveness. Well, in today's world, in many, many ways, the psychologist, the therapist has replaced the village priest. So if I'm a person who lacks meaning in life, or I feel badly, or whatever it is, I can go seek out the therapist to find meaning in life, to find the answers that they're desperately seeking.
Let's just start by letting the energy flow between us. I'm going to ask you to imagine that you were taking the energy in through your left hand.
If therapy has replaced religion, it also splintered into many sects.
Establish a sense of energy balance and tranquility between us.
Steve Thayer was an electrical engineer at Bell Laboratories in New Jersey before he turned to healing through what he believes is the recovery of cellular memories.
I work with something called energy-based body work, combining it with the power of dialoguing techniques. And I put them into one practice that is focused specifically at the healing of suppressed cellular emotions. Give her permission to just speak.
Heather is a housewife and has 2 children. She hasn't been as happy, she says, as she should be. She began to suspect that this might be connected to some forgotten childhood sexual abuse. She decided to pursue it.
Mm-hmm. It's safe to tell.
No.
Why?
Because of all the things that he said. That no one would love me, that no one would believe me. I feel like he's still around. Somehow he'll know and he'll hurt me.
Amazing attribute that the shoulders have is they store all the memory and all the trauma around the idea of should. Let's start to bring forward any emotions, any memories around the word should. If you were sexually abused and the experience was internalized, in other words, it was more traumatic than you could experience at the time, then you would have repressed into the cells of your body very, very powerful feelings. So I would be looking for fear, I would be looking for anger, feelings of powerlessness, things like that. Okay, let's remind that little inner child of yours that he was wrong.
Heather is going to 3 different therapists, trying to uncover memories.
I felt that it was important for my own healing to fill in some of the blanks around the memories that I had. I felt like I needed a more complete picture before I could really work on the healing. So I started doing hypnotherapy with Dr. Jarman. And under hypnosis, I would remember the rest, fill in the blanks.
Just rest there and heal in the light. Let the light shine on you, warm you, heal you. That's right. This is your time to stop and rest and do nothing and just soak up some more of that limitless energy. That's it.
Dr. Robert Jarman is a psychiatrist who practices present and past life hypnotherapy. He lives and works in New Jersey.
Be guided back to the next thing that you're ready to see. You're doing fine.
It's a hot sunny day and I'm playing at the edge of the water by the dock. But I can feel him watching me. I started having memories about 1.5 years ago. They were snapshots or parts of a movie or feelings that I would have, different things would trigger.
That's it.
And he takes my bathing suit off. And then all I can feel is his hand on my neck, holding me there, and just this weight on my body.
Was the sexual abuse validated?
Yes, I think that if it were a memory that was not so, that just kind of popped up in the hypnotherapy and it hadn't really happened, I don't think that I would have all these other symptoms in my life of the sexual abuse.
Go forward now to the next significant thing that happens. It's okay.
Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is an associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and the director of the trauma unit at Mass General Hospital.
Every time people tell a story, it's basically a story that is looking for somebody to believe you, to be convinced. Of vital importance for a person's well-being, own well-being, is to make a narrative of their own life that makes sense to them. And for people's own well-being, the accuracy of one's own story about oneself is not critical. We all tell tales about ourselves. We all have images of ourselves that are not entirely in keeping with the reality of one's life. But we need to have a coherent version of ourselves.
There's your sky again, your little island beach where no one can harm you. You're safe there.
Pam is Heather's mother. She is a teacher. 8 years ago, when she was diagnosed with cancer, she went into therapy to find out if there was an emotional reason for it.
My cancer really came from a lot of emotional repression. Anything that was painful at all, any of the painful emotions, I would just repress, just stuff it right down. Of course, you know, I was then not authentic either. You know, Sally Sunshine is not an authentic person. I remember one of the sessions with Dr. Jarman, I said, you know, he asked me, what would you like to be like? If you want to be authentic, you know, think of somebody that intrigues you or that would be a good role model. So I had recently read a book on 10 visionary women. And it was very interesting about how they had grown. And I said to him, it was a fascinating book. I learned a lot, and there's some characteristics I would like to build into myself. But you know what startled me? A number of these 10 women had been sexually abused as children. And I said, you know, it rather terrifies me that how can people walk around and not know awful things have happened to them in the past? And I said, you know, could this possibly be, you know, part of my past? And he said, well, there's one way to find out.
What room is this?
Her bedroom.
Who is she? What's her name? You know her first name? Okay.
Anne.
Anne, okay. What's her name?
Under hypnosis, Pam remembered that her babysitter, Anne, had molested her.
She asked me to play games.
Really? Has she done that before?
Yes.
Yeah. How old are you? About how old are you?
5.
Why are you so upset?
Because I know what she's gonna do, and I'm powerless. I can't scream.
It's okay.
She's touching me.
Yeah.
And she wants me to touch her. And I don't like it. I hate her white skin, and it's got freckles on it.
Yeah.
And it's moist. It's cold. It's kind of dampy cold. And it's something gooey. I don't know. This is awful.
It's all right. We're just watching an old movie. Take a rest now. Go to the light. Go back to the light. This person is here to heal, not to pull up old skeletons out of the closet or create them. I never let a person stop with that. When we open his closet and all kinds of horror things come out, you know, I say, well, good, all right, we found where the problem is. Now we go to the next step, which is to heal the problem. Now, I want you to imagine you're going backwards in time. You're inside your mother's womb, protected from the outside world. Once you've rested enough, you can be guided back to a previous time, a previous life. Look down at your feet when you get there and tell me what you start to see as you start to see your feet.
I'm wearing sandals. They're decorated. They have jewels on them. There's a strap that comes up between the toes and around the ankles. I'm a woman. A woman of means. I have many servants. One of my servants.
Yes.
I know who she is.
Good. You know who she is in another lifetime?
Yeah.
I see.
She was Anne.
She was Anne. Oh, all right. Tell me about it.
Pam would also remember that Anne, the babysitter who had molested her, had been in a previous life her servant, whom she apparently had badly mistreated.
And I think that's why I was particularly harsh with her, because I sensed rebellion, and it was like a challenge to me. It was a challenge to my power and my ego.
You look angry now.
Oh no, I feel real bad about it.
Is this just some confabulation on the part of the person? I don't think it is. Fortunately, I don't have to know. People come here, and I am here to help them heal. And if they see that in a past life they abused that person that in this life have passed them, and I, in working with them, pick up that this is the resolution for them, and now they don't need to go off and sue their father or whatever else. Great. You have your peacefulness. You have your resolution. The debt's paid. Now you can put it to rest.
There is a particular culture that develops between the therapist and the patient, because the patient comes and the patient is anxious. The patient is confused. The patient has a general sense of malaise. In the therapy, suddenly there is an aha experience. All of these vague things that affected my life have a cause, have a root. If we are able to challenge that root, everything will be better. So this sense of aha is tremendously exciting feeling for the patient. Now, it's not everything is vague and anxious and confusing. Now, there is a reason for all of that.
We were at the market.
Yeah.
Dawn, a therapist herself, had experienced physical problems whose roots she thought were in the past.
Trembling, are you frightened? Yes. Why?
I've had various degrees and kinds of stomach disorders my entire life, including my early childhood, that there was never any medical reason for me to have that. Just always sick to my stomach.
The king chooses the dancers to be with him.
I see.
I know he's going to choose me.
Yeah.
Tracing the roots of her problem took Dawn to the 1st century A.D.,
Chosen by the king?
No.
Why?
when she believes her stomach was slashed and she was killed.
What happens next? Do they take you somewhere?
They take me to the square.
Yeah. And then what?
And there are many soldiers there.
Yeah.
Oh, I mustn't scream.
Why? Because you're trying to be brave?
I have their dignity. I can't take my dignity.
When I was actually being killed, I had made this decision not to scream, to die with dignity. The screams were just trapped, the terror was trapped in my body. I think that's what the sick to my stomach has always been about.
That's it. Get it out and be finished with it. That's it. That's it. That's it. Go to when your spirit leaves your body.
I see it as very real, very real. Why would somebody make something up like that? And how do you manufacture those kinds of emotions? How do you do that?
In 1992, for his book Suggestions of Abuse, Dr. Michael Yapko gathered data from over 850 therapists all over the United States about the issue of repressed and recovered memories.
For my book, I interviewed many experts in many different areas. Experts on trauma, on sexual abuse, dissociation, hypnosis, suggestibility, memory. And the one question that I asked that was the only question to derive a totally unanimous answer was when I asked, how do you distinguish a true memory from a confabulation? And the unanimous answer was, regardless of what side of the issue they were on, the unanimous answer was, without external evidence, you can't.
What do you do? How do you ever know that what the patient is saying actually happened?
Yeah, it's like reading a novel. But you read a bad novelist. After a while you put a book down because the story doesn't cohere. The story doesn't make sense. People don't talk this way. People don't interact this way. And the book is lousy. If you read a great book and the characters are true to life, that's how people really feel and interact with each other. And eventually when you do clinical work with people, the internal coherence of the story, how it all hangs together, is not very different from what the great novelists do.
If a novel were about a young woman who grew up in a satanic cult, who was tortured and raped and abused in her basement, how would it read? And what would we make of it?
If I think back, what I would remember most is fear. I can't remember a time when I didn't feel afraid, when there wasn't a tremendous tension in our house, amongst all the children, really. It had a lot to do with my mother's anger. She has always been a very angry person, and so I felt deathly afraid of her anger, as if the anger was something that could actually kill me. And I guess to a child, that's a reality. You're dependent upon at least one of the people who are taking care of you, are supposed to be for your life, and so I was always afraid of her anger.
She was born to an upper-middle-class family in Santa Monica, California. She was named Anne, the second child of what would eventually be a 4-children family. Her mother was a housewife. Her father, an attorney. It was a traditional family. Every Christmas was celebrated. No birthday was ever forgotten. And there were always the gifts. But Anne remembers only anger and a yearning for her mother.
She, with my youngest sister, showed some signs of being very loving. Even with my middle sister, I used to watch her hold them, and I would feel literally as if my heart was going to burst. I wanted to be in their place. The closest I remember really feeling held by her was as an adult, and my middle sister was sitting next to her, and she leaned her head on my mom's shoulder, and I leaned my head on my sister's shoulder. We were watching a movie, and I remember thinking, this is just the closest we've ever been, you know, once removed. I left home when I was 17 to go to college on a scholarship as a voice major, and so that was kind of my first movement really out of the whole house, and I was very lost. A lot of the fears that I had always had became intensified, and it became almost impossible for me to sleep through the night, and so I started to drink so that I could sleep. I was singing a lot and doing fairly well in music. You know, that was a place where I just excelled. It was the one place where I was most truly myself. My singing was the clearest voice that I had for my pain. Singing was the only way that I really existed in the world. It was my senior recital. You know, it's a requirement for graduation as a music major, and my family attended. I remember my mom just being tremendously cold at the reception.
Did she ever compliment you on the recital?
No, never.
And yet you sang very well.
It was the best I had ever done. It was the moment when I knew that this is what I wanted to do with my life, you know.
2 days after the recital, Anne says, her mother called angry.
I just cried through the whole conversation, and I don't really remember specifically what she said, but it was, it just was like it felt like she was just peeling off layers of my skin, you know, just sort of like with a potato peeler, you know. It was excruciating, and after that phone call, I knew that I needed help. I mean, serious help. That relationship, why was it so painful?
Someone recommended Dr. Douglas Sawin, a psychologist in Laguna Beach, California. Dr. Sawin was to treat her for 6 years until they stopped their sessions in 1994. He happened to be an expert in childhood sexual trauma.
I'm able to sense that trauma, that childhood sexual trauma, especially very early, and usually in the first interview I get some feeling for it. And how shall I put it? I try very hard to provide an opportunity for clients to come into their own awareness. One of the cardinal rules of good psychotherapy is allow the client to have the insight. Don't be a brilliant therapist. Be humble, ask the questions at the right time. Timing is critical. You just ask the right questions at the right time and see what that tells the client about themselves as they answer the question.
What did you tell your therapist your problem was? Do you remember? What did you think your problem was?
That I didn't know how to relate to my mother, that there was this enormous amount of pain without, it was kind of like there was this tremendous agony that you would think would be related to something really horrible, but you can't remember what was horrible. There's all of the emotion, but none of the memory to connect it to.
2 months into the therapy, Anne went to a party where she says she was raped by an older man.
And during the rape, began to see my father's face almost superimposed on this other man's face, and it was very upsetting. It was disturbing. That really, though, was the beginning of the memories.
Dr. Samhain, who says he is a sexual abuse survivor himself, encouraged her to remember more.
I think you have to go back. I believe that you have to go back, re-experience that emotional trauma, feel it in your body, acknowledge it, and give it expression, most particularly with someone who hears the pain and is able to be there and nurture and love and care for.
I was questioning, and I began to look back over the course of my life and the interactions with my father. Why did I associate so much shame around any kind of physical contact with him? I didn't like him to hug me. I didn't like him to kiss me. I was terribly confused.
It's a very natural defense system called denial, and it's emotionally overwhelming to come to acknowledge that. And so much so that almost always when a client first begins to get in touch with that early trauma, they get physically sick as well.
Everything was falling apart. Part of what is so difficult is that I wasn't just dealing with the memories themselves or owning what had happened to me, but I was the world that I had lived in, which was one of denial, was falling apart.
For much of the time, the family wasn't aware of what was happening to Anne. Even Carrie, the closest to her in age, didn't know.
She called me at my first apartment at school, and I was unpacking things, and she said, our parents are sick. And then proceeded to tell me, the tale that Dad had molested her. At that point, it was just my father, or had abused her. She didn't really elaborate, and I was floored. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say.
And then eventually one day in October of 1988, we got a phone call and she was in the hospital.
What was wrong?
Well, in my opinion, what was wrong?
Why was she in the hospital?
She was in the hospital, according to her therapist, because she felt unsafe with herself. Those were his words. But according to the hospital records, she'd attempted suicide.
I think what happened was a confrontation over the phone between my sister's therapist and either my mother or my father or both. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, that's how they found out what she was alleging.
I said, what's happened with him? What's going on? And he said, you know. He said, you know. And I said, no what? I don't know. I said, that's why I'm asking you. He said, it's because you molested her. And I dropped the phone. I just dropped the phone. I couldn't talk. I couldn't even breathe. And
I went to grab the phone from him because he was in shock. It was just an unbearable sound coming out of a man.
That's the only thing I could think to do was to drive to a place called Anderson Valley and buy some apples. It was the only thing I could think of to do.
Did you believe it?
No. But again, there's that doubt, am I crazy? Was I in a
fugue state throughout my entire childhood. I mean, you second guess yourself. You think, what could I have missed?
Neither of my sisters or my brother remembers any abuse happening in the family at all.
And what do you make of that?
Denial. It's easier when you have 4 people that want to not remember together than it is to be one person who remembers. Perhaps they just haven't reached the same place, but it literally came down to whether or not I would choose to stay in their denial or whether I wanted to stay alive.
And in order to stay alive, she felt she had to continue her therapy. She left the hospital, then went back in and out again. She had a few friends. She didn't sing. She concentrated on her memories.
I think it was about a year into therapy that the memories started to slowly change, and there were images that weren't consistent with the memories from before, and different people in the memories, and then suddenly it was just there. It's a little bit like you have a stage and the curtain is drawn, and for some reason you can't open the curtain, and then one day it's open and you see everything that's going on, and those are the memories.
It just started, winding and winding and winding, and all of a sudden, it wasn't just my father, it was my sister, and then all of a sudden, satanic cult, and, all these just absolutely crazy notions. And believe me, if I had a doubt in the beginning, when I first spoke to her, when she first told me, by the time, this craziness had come out, it was like, what is going on here,
What was going on? In the different camps, therapists have their own explanations.
My take on that is that we don't know. That we know that for the survivor, this is very real. For her, this is a reality, or for him, this is a reality. That this is their experience of it. As a therapist, I might want to look at, is it important that a person see it this way? But most of the time, people don't want this identity. The last thing they want to be is sexually abused in their childhood, because that's not a positive identity for people to take on. But what I can say is that we know about documented examples in families where only one child is sexually abused, where one child gets picked out, and where the rest of the family is kept completely ignorant.
For Dr. Minuchin, the answer is not to be found in reality, but in therapy.
The therapy has nothing to do with reality. The therapy has to do with helping the victim to clarify its target. The victim now has a target, and the target is a target that gives the victim a sense of validation of self. That is the goal of therapy.
But is it therapeutic? Is it good, or is it just good for the moment?
The patient and the therapist feel good. Both of them feel good. That it creates havoc with the rest of the social context of the people, that is destructive to the rest of the family. It's not in the zoom lens. You see, it is a very narrow frame. And in that frame, these people live. The patient and the therapist live in this narrow frame. If you make a wide angle, and you take the family, and you take the suffering, and the potential healing of the family for the event, then you have a different story.
Anne was diagnosed as suffering from multiple personality disorder. That meant that her psyche had fractured itself into different personalities in order to protect itself from the abuse.
I think there are 27 different personalities, different people. They all have their own opinions, their feelings, their ideas, their thoughts. It can be very crowded.
she changed her name to Kate. She cut and burned herself.
My therapist would be out of town. That was a particularly vulnerable time. I would crash and burn, literally cut and burn. Somebody in me would. I'd be hospitalized for a few days. I'd come out fine. Hospitals are like institutional mothers for me.
She became convinced she remembered being ritually and sexually tortured by her parents and grandparents. Dr. Sawin accepted her memories.
I would say that the memories that clients retrieve are very close to their original experience. The ways that they differ are the sequence of things may sometimes be off, even sometimes the location, but the trauma itself, and especially the emotion, the affect and emotion around the trauma, I believe to be very close to the way that the child experienced it, or the adult experienced it as a child.
How do you deal with the enormity of the absurdity? I mean, and you show them objective evidence, like Anne said. Well, she was hidden and beaten and tortured and all of these things, and she has a perfect attendance record at school. So you show that to them. They say, well, that doesn't matter. And well, she was mutilated. So you bring in all of their pediatric records. Oh, that doesn't matter. She never had a scratch on her in her entire lifetime. And no matter what you show them, it doesn't make any difference to them.
What do you do if you feel that the reality of your client is actually a delusion? Would you tell them?
We all live in a delusion. I mean, it's just more or less delusionary. I mean, do any of us know the truth? Do we know the truth in this moment? Do we know the truth about the past at all? All childhood memories are somewhat different than what actually occurred. So what I would see in that is that if I were to try to adjust the child's reality, I would violate their trust in me. They would say, oh, you don't believe me, or I'm a bad person because I've made up this terrible story. I think I would just cause re-injury.
With Dr. Sawin's support, Kate decided to sue her parents and grandparents for $20 million damages for the years of sexual and ritual abuse that they had inflicted upon her. In her pretrial deposition, Kate did not cite any abuse. Dr. Sawin gave most of the details of the memories she had recovered in therapy. Kate remembered that Al and Judy Norris were not her biological parents. She remembered that she had been born and groomed in a cult. Judy, her mother, inserted a broomstick into her vagina, as well as spiders, wires, and vegetables. She attached electrodes to Kate's genitals. Al sexually tortured his daughter with tools from a hardware store. He also dropped Kate into a pool when she was paralyzed. Kate was made to watch abortions.
When I'm deposed in court cases, the attorneys say, well, have you gotten corroborative evidence? Have you investigated and have you corroborated this story? And I say no. And they say, you haven't? And I say no. And they say, why not? How do you know it's true? And I say, I don't care if it's true. What's important to me is that I hear the child's truth, the patient's truth. That's what's important. What actually happened is irrelevant to me. It doesn't matter.
It is a view shared by other therapists.
As a therapist, your job is not to be a detective. Your job is not to be a fact finder. Your job is not to be a judge or a jury. And your job is also not to make the family feel better. Your job is to help the patient make sense out of her life, make sense out of her symptoms, cope better with her symptoms, and make meaning out of her experience. That's your job.
Now, I know a lot of therapists work their way around this issue by saying what is called the narrative truth perspective, that if the patient believes it, then it may as well be true. And in some arenas, okay, we can let that slide. But here is a very unique context where truth matters, because if this patient is going to turn around and sue someone and say, he abused me and is going to take him to court, it'd be nice to know whether it really happened or not.
They asked that at the depositions. Well, what's your proof? How do you know that this happened? And how do you translate to the world, you know, when you feel it almost all the time, when there's that depth of pain? And in the end, I don't care if people disbelieve me. This was my reality.
Al and Judy Norris were trying to understand their own version of reality.
I was, working quite a bit and starting a career, and so I was away from home a lot. And when Anne was about almost 2 years old, John was 3 and Anne was 2. Yeah, we separated for about 18 months.
When my husband walked out at me when Anne was 2, I just shut down. Holding my little baby in my arms and rocking her, I felt a really sense of bonding, even though my feelings had shut down towards the 2 older children at that time.
Anne, Judy said, seemed devastated by her father's absence, and even more by her mother's withdrawal, which continued even after she and her husband had gotten back together again. Judy said that she knew it was happening, but was somehow paralyzed, unable to do anything about it.
I used to look into her little eyes when she was 4, and I knew there was still the question in those big brown velvety eyes that's saying, "What's wrong, Mom? Why aren't you giving something to me?" And I couldn't. And that's something I have to live with. I would say I like to make it up to her.
I want to ask you a strange question. What hurts you more, the fact that your mother was cold to you, or the fact that she ritually abused you?
That isn't such a strange question, because so many people are horrified, and rightly so, by the ritual abuse. It was just a fact of life. It was like waking up and going to school each day. It was a part of my life from the beginning until I left. What continues to be, I think, the root of every pain that I feel, every bit of desperation in my life, is the lack of mother. That, it's kind of like you can live without a lot of things, but to live without that initial bond, to live without that initial unconditional anything, even if it hadn't come from her, if there had just been one person, I think it would make a tremendous difference.
What's clear to me is that the child was terribly injured. I mean, frightfully injured, beyond what you and I might even comprehend if we didn't know. So they deserve to be supported. They deserve to have... And the best evidence, the best data we have is their memory. But something happened, something awful happened. So does it matter precisely what that something awful was?
Would it have made a difference if sexual abuse didn't happen, if ritual abuse didn't happen, but everything else, mother the way she was?
Would it have made a difference?
Yeah.
Oh, sure, a tremendous difference. To not have been assaulted sexually as a child, to not have been forced into that kind of a world that the people in the cult live in, and to just have grown up in to have grown up in an alcoholic family where there was a lot of dysfunction with a sort of a cold, abandoning mother. Yeah, that would have caused serious enough damage as it was, but, sure, it would have made a big difference.
I firmly believe that I'm never going to see Ann again. And I guess there's some anger inside of me when I see what happened to everybody in the family. On some level, I say, Ann, that's not fair. But I do love her very much.
But it just crushed both of them, just swept their marriage away, what was left of it. And as individuals, it was heartbreaking to see what they went through.
Judy Norris has not seen her daughter for 6 years.
I don't have any desire to be reconciled with either one of my parents. Do you forgive unforgivable things? No, I don't think so. What am I a survivor of? Childhood.
Next week, Part 2. A House Divided.
I haven't seen my parents in 3.5 years. I detached from them after some memories of abuse came up.
She said we were a terminally ill, totally dysfunctional family, and that she didn't want to raise her children the way she was raised.
It was like a little girl inside of me started crying out, "Daddy, why'd you do this to me? Daddy, stop it. Daddy, get away from me." And it was like I was reliving it right then.
Tore us apart. It literally ripped our hearts out. It would have been easier if she died.
It's hard because I believe my clients, and I go from the premise that this is their experience.
I don't care what these therapists say. They're doing these things to you, and the first thing they say, you're in denial. Well, what are you going to do if you're innocent? Aren't you going to say?
Someone who has abused a child is way more likely to absolutely deny it and deny it convincingly than they are to acknowledge it.
Next time on Frontline, Part 2 of Divided Memories. Funding for this Frontline special is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content.
For videocassette information about this program, please call this toll-free number, 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.